So Gareth.
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. Is it Nikos? Yeah, as Nikos mentioned, I've been involved in various, well, sporadically, I have to admit, involved in various forms of climate activism over decades, climate jobs campaigns and climate camps. At the moment, I'm involved in organizing this conference, Endgames. There are flyers around, if anyone's interested. It's in 3 weeks' time. Just around the corner from here in the Institute. So everyone's welcome to come along to that if they're interested. I want to begin with mentioning something quite inspiring that happened a couple of weeks ago, which was the Greenie Ideal motion at Labour Party conference. So it was a motion supported by 128 constituency Labour parties, which is a phenomenal number. It's by far the biggest number of CLPs backing that motion. It was backed, importantly, by many trade unions as well, led from the floor by by Matt Rack of the Fire Brigades Union, supported by the CWU and a whole bunch of other unions. It was a very radical motion, setting a target of 2030 for sort of wholesale decarbonization of the British economy. It was a motion that voiced support for accepting climate refugees, which isn't a legally constituted category yet, but should be and has to be, accepting climate refugees into this country. It was a motion that argued for soaking the rich, relieving them of some of their fortunes to pay for the essential transformation of the British economy. There was a commitment as well to nationalising the fossil fuel industries, which is a necessary first step to shutting them down. If in private hands, they're certainly going to remain pumping out as much fossil fuel as they can. So it was a very inspiring moment, and I think it gives a glimpse of some of the policies that are going to be urgently needed or have been urgently needed for the last 50, 60 years. But now there was a part of the motion that called for an end to airport expansion, not just an end to airports, which we desperately need, but an end just to the expansion of the damn things. It was nixed by a couple of the big unions, GMB and Unite. Nonetheless, it was huge, I think, a huge moment that a major political party has introduced such a radical program. Whether it gets into the Labour Party manifesto, well, and whether Labour get elected, we should see. Nonetheless, it was very inspiring. And I think it was really all made possible, at least the degree of its radicalism was made possible by the fact that we've been seeing building over the last year or more mass movements, the school strikes and Extinction Rebellion. And because it's when organizations like the Labour Party are pushed from below, that's when they can at least put radical policies on the agenda. I don't think, by the way, I broadly agree with Elia that fear can be a demobilizing sentiment, but I think a lot of the school strikers have fear as the part of the portfolio of their psychological motivation, at least. Some of those that I've heard of do. So it can be an energizing, motivating sentiment as well. Certainly, I experience fear when I think of the future, and especially in 20, 40 years' time. We'll see. Now, if global heating is going to be mitigated at all meaningfully under capitalist conditions, it's going to require a lot more than Labour Party motions at conference. We do it, I think I'm just going to raise this as a sort of conundrum. We do have to face a conundrum. Capitalism is a system of compulsive accumulation, where firms are driven by competition to expand the scale of production, to constantly introduce new product lines, and scour the world for cheaper materials to produce more and more products. This is the system, therefore, that has been impelling the planet towards tipping points where feedback mechanisms will begin to kick in more and more that could project the planet towards runaway warming and eventually a hothouse Earth, and possibly who knows? I mean, certainly mass extinction that Elia mentioned, maybe even of Homo sapiens, we'll see. So capitalism is driving the planet towards this conflagration, and yet the only powers that in the short and medium term are able to mobilize the resources and manpower that are necessary to launch a sharp change, a sharp transition, a Green New Deal are capitalist states. And if there isn't a radical global transformation, or at least a transformation in the global north and in the BRICS, so-called, some sort of very radical transition in the next transformation in the next decade or two, then global heating could be absolutely impossible to reverse. So much is going to hang on how the left tries to finesse this problem. Now, so that's so much. That's by way of an introduction. Being a nerd and having studied at university a long time ago, where I treated the question I was asked a bit like you treat an essay question: is global heating reversible under capitalism? So this got me wondering: is it reversible under capitalism? Well, if global heating is going to be reversed under capitalism, you're going to have to even overpower the effects of the feedback mechanisms that are kicking in, the melting of the cryosphere and so on. If that's to be achieved, then vast quantities of carbon are going to have to be removed from the atmosphere and put back into the lithosphere. It's always great to be talking to Greeks and using complicated words like lithosphere, because everybody understands automatically what you're talking about. So let's start. You could start with technological solutions. So carbon removal solutions, for example. And I take Elia's point absolutely that there's a problem in the sort of basic kind of ideology of capitalism to focus atomistically on one problem molecule. But nonetheless, it is a problematic molecule, and it is going to have to be removed en masse if global heating is going to be reversed, to address the sort of essay question that we were given. And so far, very few solutions have come up. What are the various options? Well, you can sequester carbon into a more solid state through regenerative agriculture, through biochar, through afforestation, protecting wetlands, that sort of thing. Obviously, there are limitations of those strategies. Afforestation requires a lot of land, much of which is used for agriculture. There's the problem that afforestation doesn't actually put carbon back in the lithosphere, and trees will rot eventually, releasing methane. And a lot of them seem to have a habit of burning, especially in the Arctic and the Amazon lately, and so on. So there are limits on these solutions. Nigel Farage was on the radio this morning, and his one environmental policy that he advanced was afforestation. But it's the one that doesn't, and of course, it's a good thing to plant lots of trees, but it doesn't get the carbon back under the ground. Then, of course, there's carbon capture and storage, taking the carbon out of power plants, steelworks, cement works, the carbon dioxide, trying to and putting it in massive pipelines, sticking it under the ground somewhere. There are drawbacks to that. Most of the plants so far involve fossil fuel corporations, and it's not actually, anyway, it's not actually removing carbon from the atmosphere. It's just simply reducing emissions. It's vastly expensive. You have to build enormous pipeline systems. And much of this infrastructure in the near future is likely to be in the hands of the polluter industries themselves. So it's asking the fox to guard the hen house. Or you can try and extract carbon dioxide directly from ambient air and stick it underground. That is so far incredibly expensive. Vast amounts of energy are required to create the chemicals you need, the sodium hydroxide, etc. And that energy would have to be supplied for it to be, deliver its purpose from renewables. But renewables, and I'm including here solar, wind, and geothermal, all combined make up only 1.5%. 1.5%, that's almost 0% of global total primary energy supply at the moment. 1.5%, almost nothing. There's a lot of hype around them. And when you look purely at electric power, obviously the figure is higher than that, but we need to look at all energy, including the energy that people stick in their cars. Then, of course, there's BECCS, bioenergy into carbon capture and storage. It was the basis for the Paris Agreement of a few years ago. All the hopes of the Paris Agreement, reducing climate change, global heating to about 1.5 degrees over pre-industrial levels, all of their hopes are pinned on BECCS. But it's very expensive, will take up vast quantities of land, half a continent or two. Plus, changing the land use releases a lot of carbon as well. So even in its own terms, it might be pointless. So there are real problems with some of these technologies that are under discussion. But possibly nuclear fusion will come along, suddenly switch on. There's no sign of it, but maybe, who knows? Possibly some extraordinary catalyst will be discovered to extract carbon at very low energy and enable a massive rollout of carbon capture and storage and so on, atmospheric. Returning carbon to the lithosphere and reversing global heating under capitalism, but don't hold your breath. What this also means is that even under socialism, it would be pretty damn difficult to reverse global heating, given the technologies that are available. The other sorts of technologies that are in discussion for at least mitigating global heating through radically reducing the amount of emissions we're sticking into the atmosphere. There are things like, obviously, the ones you know about, renewable energies, electric vehicles, high-speed rail, and so on. And rolling these out around the world is something I broadly support. But I think a lot of the discussion of them, it shows a lack of awareness of what is involved in energy and materials terms. Take high-speed rail, for example. Let's say you shut down all plane travel because aviation is one of the worst offenders in climate change. Shut down all aviation. Well, there's an assumption on large parts of the left that you have to replace all these plane flights through high-speed rail. Well, okay, so connect up all the cities of, say, America. We'll define a city as quite a big one, bigger than New Orleans. That's 50 cities. Connect them all up. Now, whatever the sort of way you connect them, whatever the network topology, that's going to take an awful lot of track, and the rest of the world is going to demand the same living standards, obviously, as the Americans. So the Salvadorian in eastern Brazil will need to rapidly get to events in Manaus, and the Muscovite to Omsk, and so on all around the world. Then, however, you might find, well, where are you going to extract all the materials for this? Because these sorts of construction projects, as you can see from just HST, London to Manchester, is going to take 20 million tons of concrete. These construction projects rolled out around the world are going to be absolutely colossal, possibly enough to burn the planet to a crisp. I don't know. I haven't done the sums. You could reach a stage where so much cement is being manufactured and so much iron ore dug up that the recent breakneck expansion of materials use in China, for example, will look in comparison like a sort of after-dinner burp or something. Because concrete is, after the fossil fuels themselves, the greatest source of the greatest single source of greenhouse gas emissions. And as I said, 100 miles of high-speed rail in Britain is going to take 20 million tons of concrete. That's the big one, the metric tons, not the little American ones. By one estimate, concrete already outweighs the combined carbon mass of every single tree, bush, and shrub. I like the way they include bushes and shrubs. I'm not quite sure of the difference. On the whole planet, every tree, bush, and shrub on the whole planet. So I think we need to add to that, but we need to be a bit wary as well. Same applies to renewable energies. Wind, carpet the world with wind. There's a wonderful book, I hope it's going to come out soon. I've read the manuscript by an anthropologist called David McDermott Hughes. It's called Who Owns the Wind? The Wind. It's a gorgeous book. It's kind of ode to wind power, to wind turbines, to a turbine bristle landscape. It's an eco-modernist manifesto. He says, my landscape of utopia sprouts with steel. But even though I'm not an eco-modernist like him, it's a beautiful book. And it makes a powerful argument that the air should be nationalized. It's a brilliant argument. Nonetheless, what struck me in this book is that it discusses wind energy from every conceivable angle: the aesthetic, the cultural, the literary, the political, economic, obviously, the legal, the technological, the juridical, even the ornithological. Every standpoint on wind is discussed in this book, except there's this glaring absence, and you find it in a lot of discussion on of this, a glaring absence. There's no discussion of the materials themselves. There's endless discussion of the technologies of wind turbines and this is Gadget Boy who's written the book. We love these technologies. They're where hope lies. We need these technologies. Any left-wing solution to climate change is going to depend on technological innovation and advance in these things. However, what's not mentioned is all the materials that go into them. Turbines, it's as if turbines don't just turn thin air, they're made of thin air as well, and just to labor the point on this book. But they're not, of course. They're made of concrete and steel and copper and glass fiber and neodymium as well, which is neodymium when mined is incredibly polluted, with mines surrounded by toxic lakes and workers in neighborhoods suffering. So when we say we want to carpet the world with wind turbines, we have to factor that in. And other hazards are only now just coming to light. Renewables, the renewables investments have been ramping up the use of, and therefore the leaks of, sulfur hexafluoride, which is 24,000 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than our favorite molecule, carbon dioxide, and it lasts in the atmosphere for thousands of years. So when we invest in these things, well, we can probably do something different, and we need to talk about capitalism and cost cutting when we talk about the use of sulfur hexafluoride. But nonetheless, you're getting the point. Similar applies to electric vehicles. In many countries, Germany, the United States, for example, if you include the whole life cycle of creating these cars, including the production and mineral extraction, which is immensely energy swallowing, they emit much the same in terms of greenhouse gases over the life cycle than petrol fuel cars. In some of the discussion around the Green New Deal, we find that huge faith is being placed in technology. Develop electric aircraft, but no one looks at the small print. Electric aircraft are never going to fly long distances, only short hops, for which train is better. Or biofuel, but if you fill a Boeing 747 with coconut oil as you can, this is going to take all the world's coconut production just to supply the planes from Heathrow Airport. Being a nerd, I once actually did the sums on this and added up how many coconuts you would need. I can't remember how many it was, but it was an awful lot. So technology, again, this is a conundrum that we're going to face. On one hand, technological applications and innovations are obviously going to have to play a vital role in any Green New Deal or any other left-backed program of change. But on the other hand, we have to bear in mind that one of the defining ideologies of capitalist society is technological fetishism, which arises, where does technological fetishism arise from? Essentially the role of innovation in enabling businesses to steal a march on their rivals and accrue super profits, technological rents. I just before coming here, I went to the British Museum and was looking at the friezes on the walls in the Assyrian rooms, and all the friezes were of the booty stolen in wars by some of the emperors of Assyria. And of course, in those days, it's the sort of surplus product that's getting exalted ideologically and put on the friezes and the walls nowadays at the British Museum are booty from war. But nowadays, it's the gadgets, the technological developments, because so innovation becomes the elixir of success for individual firms. And also crucial to successful capital accumulation is the continual novelty, the continual innovation of new product lines and so on. Industries have to persuade us we need the latest gadgets, or we can't play a full part in social life. So here we face the puzzle. When is our enthusiasm for a particular eco-technology, when is it simply buying into that kind of technological fetishism? when we advocate electric vehicles, are we doing so because that's necessary to a rational ecological transition, maintaining mobility for the world's population, or are we just, buying into a ruse of capital to develop new products, encourage the junking of our existing cars, buy new ones to keep the wheels of accumulation spinning fast and spinning faster? On the political left, I find that I think we can see that technological fetishism and green growth, which Elio was mentioning, I think, they sync together, S, Y, and C, they synchronize together with a politics of class coalition, because the emphasis is on strategies like developing electric vehicles that key sectors of the capitalist class can get behind. These are strategies premised on profit, on accumulation, and on growth. So with that, is degrowth the alternative? I find myself quite torn at the moment between the Greenie Ideal program and the degrowth program. Broadly speaking, the Greenie Ideal, if it has a kind of central defining politics, its or political complexion, it's social democracy, often the left variant, but not always. The degrowthers are essentially narodnik. So I see them as similar to the Russian populist movement prior to the Russian Revolution, who became the socialist revolutionaries in Russia, and from whom the Bolsheviks, the revolutionary Marxists in Russia, learned more than they did from the Mensheviks, incidentally. Now, it's widely supposed that the Green New Deal and the degrowth program, are antithetical. And I want to suggest that they are not. Or more precisely, the sort of mainstream of each is almost by definition antithetical. The Green New Dealers, green growth. The degrowthers, degrowth, opposites. But at the left flanks of each body of thought and activism, I see a convergence. Because degrowth isn't just a politics of less, as is sometimes argued. It's more, I see it as a politics of less is more. In other words, for arguing for a smaller overall materials and energy envelope with very differentiated contents. This is what Elio was referring to, albeit not in a degrowth context. So for the rich, much, much less. For the billions of people in the world who like even the basics, more good food, better housing, abundant clean water, efficient sanitation, excellent public transport, quality public amenities. In other words, the abolition of relative poverty and absolute poverty, which could be done very, very quickly indeed. For the global north, less energy use overall, less beef, fewer planes and cars, but more self-governed time, cleaner air, better public transport, less hierarchy. All of this requires transformations of the infrastructures of energy, mobility, social reproduction, and with plenty of technology use as well. And many degrowthers campaign for a large-scale expansion of renewables, of public transport, and so on, which do require colossal construction programs. So on the left of the degrowth movement, they're committed to these things and to strong unions, which are vital for struggling for a shorter working week and for improved public services. The best degrowthers I've seen are very similar to the most at the left-wing edge of the degrowth and the left-wing edge of the Green New Deal. I see a convergence around what we might call a reproductive economy of care, understood not only as caring between humans, but between humans and the non-human environment. You find it in the work, for example, of a Jacobin author, Alisa Battistoni, who talks about a future climate-stable socialism, which is oriented toward sustaining and improving human life, as well as the lives of other species, with an emphasis on green-collar labor and pink-collar labor, so teaching, gardening, cooking, nursing, work that makes people's lives better without consuming vast quantities of resources, and all of which would generate significant carbon emissions. A similar argument is put by Titi Bhattacharya in a Jacobin essay called Three Ways a Green New Deal Can Promote Life Over Capital. So that's an example of the sort of left wing of that movement. Do I have 5 minutes to talk about Marx and Engels?
Yep.
Oh, because I know that's what you've come to hear about. I just wanted to finish with a little meditation on Marx and Engels and growth. Because I think in Marx and Engels you find, I mean, they were always figured as kind of growth manic philosophers who are arguing for expansion of productive forces, with productive forces understood very crudely as technology and so on. But I think in Marx and Engels you find fantastic resources for a critique of growth. They were philosophers who advocated the continual expansion of human needs as something they found just joyful and fascinating about the human species. But that expansion of human needs is perfectly compatible with a reduction in resource use. They wrote a book called the Communist Manifesto, which argues that already the productive forces had already in 1848, that's before the invention of the car, before the invention of the telephone, before the invention of the safety pin, for God's sake, already in 1848, the productive forces had reached the stage at which a transition to communism was feasible. The purpose of production, they argue, is not simply material goods, but the universality of individual needs, capacities, pleasures, productive forces. I'm quoting Marx. And he contrasts those goals with what nowadays would be called the growth fetish that develops within capitalist society, which is characterized by the appearance of production as the aim, production itself as the aim of mankind, and wealth as the aim of production instead of humanity, human needs as the aim of production. He insists that the natural environment is a necessary part of our wealth, which has to be treated with care. He was a critic of deforestation, and so on. There's a lovely point at the start of Capital. He writes that labor is not the only source of material wealth. Labor is its father, and the earth is its mother. Slightly sexist, but he was quoting William Petty on the labor is its father bit. But the many disciples of Marx have forgotten about the mother bit. I think you can go a little further than that. Marx developed a rich critique of the growth paradigm in Capital, essentially, and a critique of the way in which capitalism burns up the planet, depleting and degrading the environment because those things don't show up on the bottom line, and the bottom line is all that matters to capital. So the drive to value expansion makes any radical reductions in the throughput of raw materials difficult to achieve. So Marx and Engels weren't really Promethean productivists, I would argue. They aspired towards an abundance, but not in the techno-fetishizing way that we find on parts of the left today. And yeah, I'll may as well leave it at that.
Yeah. You got it. So, Maria.
Okay. Since I live in Greece and English is not my primary language, please be a little patient with me. To the title question, is climate change reversible under capitalism? My short answer is no, but since we're here, we might as well talk about it. First of all, the latest climate models that were published less than a month ago predict, predict that if carbon emissions continue unabated, the Earth's temperature could rise 2 degrees more than the models used in the Paris Agreement, so the Earth is going to heat even faster than it was previously thought So much deeper cuts would be needed than the ones agreed in Paris, which we're not able to meet anyway.